just something I want folks to bear in mind as well. Okay, well, it is 7 o'clock, and I want to thank everyone and welcome you to Strategic Vision and Planning. Again, thank you for taking time out of your busy schedules to attend this webinar. I hope it will be a very helpful discussion led by our president, Donald Romanek. Just a few words about the Episcopal Church Foundation. We are an independent lay-led organization founded in 1949, whose mission is to strengthen congregations through vision and planning, leadership development, and raising financial resources for ministry. We have a wide variety of programs. The three major program areas are strategic resources, leadership resources, and financial resources. But they all share a common goal, and we know our programs are being effective when we see lay and clergy leaders working together to transform the church, healthy, vital, vibrant Episcopal communities of faith, meaningful opportunities for Christian stewardship and effective fundraising, and innovative mission-based ways to be the church of the future. So with that, I just want to introduce all of you to Donald Romanek, our president. And Donald, I'm wondering if you could just say a few words about yourself.
Yes. Well, thank you, Miguel. And first of all, I want to welcome everybody and thank you all for being here tonight. It's always fun and rewarding to see where people are tuning in from. And we have people in Europe, we have people all over the world, all over the globe, and the islands joining us tonight. And that is the beauty and wonder of technology. I have had the privilege of being president of the Episcopal Church Foundation for over 10 years. And in that capacity have met with literally hundreds, if not thousands, of lay and clergy leaders throughout the church, vestries and diocesan committees and bishops, and really hearing about the challenges and opportunities of being a church in a changing world. My background, I'm a lawyer by background. I've been involved in a lot of civic and charitable organizations, and I was active in the church at all levels, including being senior warden and vestry member for probably about 125 years. So for those of you who are laboring in the field, I understand the ministry of being a vestry member, and I affirm and support all of you who are leading your local faith communities with passion, energy, and faith. So I am also very passionate about visioning and planning. It was something that we embarked on in the early days of my tenure here at ECF, and it's something I like to talk about and preach about and teach about, and I'm really thrilled that you're all here to share in this webinar, and hopefully you can participate and provide some feedback and questions to make this as meaningful as possible. But let's begin with the prayer. Disturb us, Lord, when we are too well pleased with ourselves, when our dreams have come true because we have dreamed too little, when we arrived safely because we sailed too close to the shore. Disturb us, Lord, when with the abundance of things we possess, we have lost our thirst for the waters of life. Having fallen in love with life, we have ceased to dream of eternity. And in our efforts to build a new earth, we have allowed our vision of the new heaven to dim. Disturb us, Lord, to dare more boldly, to venture on wider seas, where storms will show your mastery, where losing sight of land we shall find the stars. We ask you to push back the horizons of our hopes and to push into the future in strength, courage, hope, and love. Amen. So tonight we're going to try to accomplish a few things, and again, your feedback and questions are going to be critical to making this a success. We're going to talk about one cathedral story about how they started this process of visioning and planning. We're going to talk a little bit about the difference between mission and vision. Spend some time on strategic thinking versus strategic planning and why both are important and necessary. Talk about how you name goals and evaluate proposed strategies. Provide some resources on how you can engage in this process in an ongoing way, and discuss some next steps. But let's talk a little bit about St. Marys Cathedral. We worked with St. Marys Cathedral, a small parish cathedral in a small diocese in the Midwest, who was struggling with kind of starting this whole process of visioning and planning, and how do you even begin? Because often parishes and faith communities are overwhelmed by the whole idea of a strategic planning process. It sounds so formal, it sounds so complex, and it really isn't, and that's what we're here to kind of talk about today. So first of all, what they did is we led them through an exercise in identifying their ministry strengths. You know, often that's kind of a basic first step. What are we good at? What do we have that is especially good, productive, competitive with what's going on in the community? And they identified a lot of things. And you can imagine a lot of it was their theology and worship, their location in a downtown area that was starting to develop housing and amenities, the fact that they had a balanced budget and no debt, their hospitality, their history, the fact that their physical plant was in decent shape, their outreach. They went through the whole series of, you know, what was good and exciting and transformational about their parish. Then the idea was, you know, but who are they? What is their identity? And, you know, we will talk about mission and vision in a minute. But what St. Mary's really felt they needed to do was kind of describe who they are and what they do. And you see their identity statement on the right-hand side of the screen. An Episcopal faith community in the downtown area that is faithfully engaged in participatory, meaningful, and relevant worship, forming and empowering Christian disciples and nurturing each other, the city, the region, and the diocese through outreach, fellowship, enrichment, hospitality, and service, all in the name of Jesus. This was kind of an eye-opening experience for them when they finally were able to reach some consensus on who they were and what they were doing. From that, they identified 3 key areas for further work, and they developed some strategic criteria for evaluating how they would move forward with these goals. So just to step back a bit, because, you know, often we talk about mission statements and vision statements, and often there is a confusion or blurring of what both are. What we at ECF the distinction we like to make is that mission is basically a simple operational description of what you're doing, what you feel God is calling you to do at a particular time and place. And what we often advise is that if you're going to articulate a mission statement or a mission for your congregation, it should be very specific and basically distinguish your community from other organizations or even other faith communities in the area. And sometimes it's a statement, sometimes it's just a list of things that you do and you are. And you see on the screen, at St. Paul's, we are called to welcome everyone, gather weekly for worship and form faithful disciples, serve the poor and least of these in our midst, and use our time, talent, and treasure in service to God's kingdom. So here at St. Paul's, the folks at St. Paul's decided we need to be able to articulate what we feel we are called to do and how we are living into that call. And that is a simple mission, but a direct mission, and a mission that helped St. Paul's move from point A to point B. The thing you want to avoid are kind of very fancy, lofty mission statements that may look nice engraved and framed in your narthex, but really is not descriptive of who you are and what you do. On the other hand, a vision is a hopeful picture of the future that describes what the congregation, what the community, what the world would look like if your mission has been accomplished. Now, so St. Paul's, when you look at St. Paul's, that statement is kind of almost a blend of both a mission and a vision, because it does cast an aspirational kind of future idea of what you hope will happen if you actively engage in what God is calling you to do. And often people will say, well, why a vision statement? If a mission statement is a very practical kind of articulation of what you're called to do, why get aspirational? Doesn't that get messy? But I think the beauty of vision statements or the visioning process is that it engages people in a discussion of the future of the congregation, of the future of the faith community, of what the congregation might look like in the next 5 to 10 years. What are the challenges and opportunities? And quite frankly, as leaders of a faith community, both lay and ordained, you really need to cast a hopeful vision for the future in order to get people to be part of the community, give of their time, talent, and treasure, and kind of settle in for the long run. So examples of visions could be St. Paul's will be alive with the sound of children and families once again. St. Michael's will be reconnected to its neighborhood, living out Christ's mission to serve those in the most need. And when you do engage in a visioning process or articulating visions, you have to keep some things in mind. Does your vision involve growth? Is growth an important part of where you see yourself going? Does it involve expanded service to the community or outreach? Does it include financial sustainability? But these are all very important processes in engaging the community in this process of articulating what you're called to do right now and what you see yourselves being and doing in the future. John Cotter, who is a kind of one of the seminal authors on the idea of leading change, has a very important quote on vision. He said that vision plays a key role in producing useful change by helping to direct, align, and inspire actions on part of a large number of people. Without an appropriate vision, a transformation effort dissolves into a list of confusing, incompatible, and time-consuming projects that go in the wrong direction or nowhere at all. So let's go back to St. Mary's, our friends at St. Mary's. Now, as you recall, St. Mary's articulated an identity statement that kind of encapsulated what they felt their current mission was, and also had an element of vision to it in terms of their ongoing sense of connection to the parish, the city, the diocese, and the wider community. And through that, they decided that they needed to focus on 3 broad strategic areas. One was strengthening worship, one was building discipleship, and one was nurturing membership. And if you go back and look at their identity statement, you'll see that each of those areas goes back to what they articulated they were called to do. They talked a lot about worship. They talked about kind of forming their members and empowering them to be disciples. And the whole idea of nurturing membership, nurturing the community, nurturing the diocese. So let's go back to, let's move on to kind of this whole idea of strategic planning and strategic thinking. Now, we at ECF are not against strategic planning. But we firmly feel, though, that the traditional strategic planning process may not be a viable option in a rapidly changing world. Let me tell you a little more about that. Now, the traditional strategic planning process would be that, for a period of 6 to 12 to 18 months, you would engage in this planning process where you talk to a lot of people, and then you come up with maybe a mission statement or a vision statement and goals and objectives. And often you come up with goals and objectives over a 3 to 5 year period. Now, there's nothing wrong with being aspirational and having some long-term goals, but often the goals are so aspirational, are so large, are so unachievable that people get overwhelmed, and that's why a lot of strategic plans wind up sitting on the shelf. And a lot of strategic plans will say things like, we are going to double our membership over the next 5 years. We are going to increase our stewardship by 10% a year. We are going to grow an endowment to $10 million over the next 3 to 5 years. Again, all good aspirational visions, but not a real practical approach to moving forward. So some of the problems with classic strategic plans is that they generate more goals than can be reasonably pursued. And I've seen strategic plans with like 10, 12 goals, when I think most plans, even for a year, should be 3 to 5. They mistake goals for strategies, and we'll talk about that in a minute. You expect that somehow you're going to be able to fit this grandiose plan into a 3 to 5 year period, as though there's something magic about 3 to 5 years. And we all know from our own personal lives and our professional lives and our family lives, it's very difficult planning 3 to 5 years ahead, especially if there are unforeseen circumstances. And the idea of forecasting 3 to 5 years into the future from a snapshot in time becomes more and more difficult. So what do? Does that mean you don't engage in strategic planning or thinking? Absolutely not. So what I like to do and what we like to do and what we like to advocate and teach and preach is what's more important than strategic planning is strategic thinking. Now, looking at classic strategic plans, planning process, 18 months, and then implementation. But when you look at the life of a congregation or an organization or even your own personal life, you are constantly involved in planning, implementing, planning, implementing, planning, implementing. It's not like, okay, I'm going to plan now for the next 3 months and then I'm going to implement. We are faced with challenges, opportunities, crises, day-to-day stuff that needs ongoing planning and implementation. So strategic thinking is an ongoing process. And what we advocate is that you should always be involved in ongoing strategic thinking, even on a monthly basis at your vesture meeting. So it's an ongoing, iterative process. It identifies goals that are aligned with long-term vision, but the goals are narrow, they're focused, they're specific, and they're constantly reviewed to make sure that they continue to be relevant and achievable. You identify a few strategies for reaching those goals, and you evaluate your strategies in light of mission, financial capacity, and organizational uniqueness, and more. And we'll talk about that in a minute. So let's stop here. There are some questions on the board here, but do you have any, does that make sense? Do you have any questions about the idea of ministry strengths, mission and vision, the idea of a hopeful vision for the future, strategic thinking versus strategic planning? There's some questions on the screen, but if you could type in any questions that you might have, that if I haven't been clear or if I haven't made sense, I'd appreciate some feedback here. The Valhalla, I like that. The ultimate, the pinnacle. Rob has a...
Yes, and again, if you would like to type in a question, the chat box is on the lower right-hand side of the screen.
The other thing about ministry strengths, it's a positive exercise. I think a lot of you heard about appreciative inquiry as a way of engaging in a vision process, and identifying ministry strengths is kind of a variation on that. Obviously, the traditional SWOT analysis, strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, threats, that can also be useful, but often then people get stuck in the challenges and the threats. So starting with ministry strengths, articulating a mission, vision, or identity is a good way to kind of start the process. Not that you want to bury your head in the sand, but if people get bogged down in the negatives too early in the process, it could go awry. Aha. Yes, Rob, we're going to talk about that in a minute. Yeah, budget drives all feel good, yes. And that's why we're going to talk about how you measure or evaluate proposed strategies. Because back to this, we're going to double in size, we're going to build a new building. It all comes down to resources, including human resources. We understand mission is God's vision as ours, and ministry is what we do to implement the vision, which is aimed at God's mission. Yeah, that's a good point as well, because basically what the church is about is God's mission in the world. There's also mission, ministry, programs, and we'll talk more about that as we go forward. And we're talking about goals and strategies, and often, you'll see a strategic plan will have mission, vision, goals, strategies, action steps, and sometimes the nomenclature becomes overwhelming. I think sometimes it's helpful to look at as a goal as a specific and measurable statement of a desired result, and we'll talk about SMART goals. And strategies are operational ways of achieving or fulfilling the mission. We'll talk about strategies in a minute. So, SMART goals. A specific strategy. Broad goals can be helpful, but a specific goal has a much greater chance of being accomplished than a general goal. And obviously, when you're articulating a specific goal, who is involved, what do I want to accomplish, where is it going to happen, a time frame, requirements and constraints, and specific reasons or purpose or benefits. For example, a personal goal could be, I need to get in shape. But a specific goal would be, I need to join a health club and work out 3 times a week. I need to improve my diet. A specific goal could be, I need to eat more fresh fruits and vegetables and avoid red meats on a weekly basis. The other issue, it has to be measurable. You have to establish concrete criteria for how are you going to know this is happening. There needs to be some measures. Not every goal can be converted into numerical measurements, but there need to be touch points. There need to be goalposts, ways of measuring. Although back to the point earlier, Rob, when most goals require some element of resources, whether it's human resources, whether it's financial resources. So often the achievement of the goal is tied into raising or identifying the resources to make that happen. Assigned to, who is responsible? Unless there is a responsible party or a body, it's just not going to happen. And, People could say, well, it's the vestry, it's the rector. No, it has to be John, it has to be Rob, it has to be Carla, who would put together a leadership team to make it happen. But someone has to be held accountable and responsible. Realistic. Now, back to this whole idea. Well, you're talking from both sides of your mouth. You're talking about aspirational visions, and you're talking about being realistic. A goal that would be considered high or significant can be realistic, and often the more significant goals are easier to accomplish than the simple goals, because you have to kind of pull out all the stops to make it happen. But it has to be realistic within the context of who you are, what you're being called to do, and the resources you need to make that happen. And they have to be timely. You have to come up with time frames, again, that are realistic. And back to my classic strategic plan, doubling your membership in 2 years, or increasing your endowment from 0 to 10 million in 5 years, may not be a realistic or time-specific goal. And perhaps that's when you step back and say, okay, this is where we are in terms of stewardship and resources. How do we move from point A to point B to point C, rather than jumping right to this incredibly aspirational, unrealistic, and quite frankly, frustrating goals? And I think one of the reasons why people put strategic plans on the shelf is they find the process so overwhelming that the only way they can deal with it is pretend it doesn't exist. So let's go to some evaluation. Now this whole process of evaluating proposed strategies kind of brings a lot of these kind of SMART goal aspects into focus. So, for example, the goal is to increase funding for our ministries over the next 10 years. Now, if that were going to be a more specific goal, you would say increase funding for our ministries 10% a year over the next 10 years. I think the whole 10-year plan might be a little difficult, but let's say that's the goal that you're challenged with or facing. So you start saying, okay, what are our proposed strategies? Now remember, proposed strategies are operational ways of achieving your goal. So you'll say, well, we could have annual fundraising events. We can have a tag sale. We can have an annual banquet. We can have a concert. We could leverage building for rental income. We could rent our space for weddings and funerals and bar mitzvahs and quinceañeras and office space. We can start a small business and generate revenue through that. Or we can do a capital campaign to alleviate payments on debts. Now, this is kind of a brainstorming session. But then, okay, so you come up with all these ideas and say, okay, but how do we evaluate these? What criteria do you use? Okay, annual fundraising events, but we're not really in a community that supports fundraising events, or we really don't have that as part of our history or culture, or we don't have any place for rental income. In fact, every square inch of our building is being used, or we would need to put in so many capital improvements that it wouldn't be worth it, or what kind of small enterprise are we going to build, or a capital campaign? We can't even do an annual stewardship fund. So how do you evaluate these? So let's look at some criteria on how you might want to do this. Does this support our mission and vision? If your mission is to, let's go back to St. Mary's, St. Mary's Cathedral, to have quality worship, build disciples, nurture the community. I mean, do any of these strategies advance that mission and vision? If our goal is, and our mission and vision involves being better connected with our community and serving the needs of the underserved in the area, Does that strategy advance that, interfere with that? Would it be misperceived by the community if we were engaged in some kind of enterprise that the community would not respond to? For example, something that people would feel would violate the zoning restrictions or the culture of the neighborhood. Is this unique, or does it duplicate others' work? This was something that St. Mary's Cathedral engaged in. They talked about feeding ministries. Now, feeding ministries are very important. But if every church in the downtown area is doing a feeding ministry, is what you're doing duplicating, replicating, or interfering? Might it be more feasible to partner with the Methodist Church or the Roman Catholic Church or whomever else is involved in an active feeding ministry? Is it financially sustainable through potential gifts or fees? Back to your point, Rob, if it's not sustainable through potential gifts or fees, it's probably something that's not gonna happen or not be viable. Do we have the internal capacity to begin and sustain this initiative? Now, when St. Mary's came up with a criteria, and many of these were similar to these, they also came up with other ways of evaluating proposed strategies, that there had to be somebody within the congregation needed to kind of rise to the occasion and say, I will take leadership for making this happen. Not that that person was going to do everything. Obviously, it would take a team with the support of the staff and the rector of the vestry. But they felt that unless somebody felt excited, enthusiastic about this particular initiative, they weren't going to start a new ministry. And there are a variety of other proposed strategies that you could put together on the list in light of your own particular culture, your own particular capacity. We have a lot of small congregations, and I'm sure a lot of you come from small congregations. And you can't be all things to all people at all times. And that's why it goes back to the basics of your mission, your vision, your identity. So, we at ECF call that a strategy filter. And even when we go out and we get ideas about new programs or new initiatives that fall into our mission and vision. And Miguel talked about vision, falls into visioning and planning, leadership development, or financial resource development. Those are very broad categories, and the needs in those three areas are enormous throughout the church. And while we are blessed with some resources, we do have a finite capacity. We have we have financial limitations, we have staff limitations. So we developed a strategy screen much along these areas that involved, is it true to our mission and vision? Are we getting into mission creep? Now, it's very easy for an organization like ours to kind of say, well, everything is leadership, everything is vision and planning, everything is financial resource development. You have to go back to those basics. Do we have kind of are we unique in that, is this a kind of venture or initiative that meets our culture, that fits our expertise, or is somebody else better at doing it, or is someone else already doing it? We love to reinvent the wheel in the Episcopal Church, and while I'm really supportive of kind of entrepreneurial initiatives, including kind of mission and outreach, I think we have to be a little more careful about getting into areas that may not be suitable for who we are and what we're called to do. Financial sustainability. I know there are wonderful parables about the lilies of the field and the birds of the air, and that God will provide. But if you get into a new initiative or a ministry that is not going to be sustainable, or you're going to build up expectations or unrealistic expectations or get people excited, and then it's going to fall flat, that's not helpful as well. What often is a good way to kind of approach that is through a pilot initiative. And we do a lot of things on a pilot basis. And sometimes pilot periods last 3 years. In fact, we have one initiative where we're moving through the third year of the pilot phase, and we're looking at it, making it an ongoing program. And pilot's not just a nomenclature or a way of getting off the hook, but it's a way of evaluating whether this has some legs and could be a sustainable, viable program. It's a way for people to get together and continue to evaluate programs and ministries and initiatives. And it's a way of gracefully saying, you know, we tried it, but it just does not seem to be sustainable. Does it fit your identity? If you're not a fundraising parish, if people don't like to go to tag sales or organized tag sales or spaghetti suppers, if people don't want to do it, the last thing you should do is get into areas where there isn't energy or passion or capacity. And again, internal capacity, and that is financial capacity, that is people capacity, that is energy and enthusiasm. And back to St. Mary's, St. Mary's felt very strongly that unless somebody was ready, willing, and able to lead an initiative, that they were not going to move forward with it. Okay, next. So here's some next steps, especially if you're saying, okay, where do we begin? Focus on discernment. You know, where is God calling your congregation? And the logical place for that to happen is at the leadership team level. And that, in most situations, would be vestries, mission committees. You know, a lot of larger parishes will often kind of form a strategic planning committee. Now, I don't have any problems with the strategic planning committee, especially if you're getting into kind of complex implementation. But I think the place that all begins is at the vestry or mission committee or parish committee level. Because we feel very strongly that the vestry is that body in the congregation, in the elected lay leaders in partnership with the rector and the priest, who are responsible for the missional, strategic, fiduciary responsibilities and aspects of the parish. And discernment is an ongoing process. It's not a one-shot deal. It's not a 6-month deal. It's not an 18-month deal. And you should build in opportunities to discern on a regular basis. And what I often suggest is that at every vestry meeting, there should be a period of time where you're not solving problems, you're not making decisions, but you're discerning what God is calling you to do. And it may be an open-ended discussion of a big question such as, how does Christ Church get reconnected to its neighborhood? Or how does St. Mary's respond to the changing demographics of our area? Or how do we deal with the changing needs of our congregation? Or how do we deal with stewardship in a new and dynamic way? Opportunities to engage back to that strategic thinking, where you're not going to solve the problem in one session, but you're going to continue to engage in that process. And you have to realize that in our theology as Episcopalians and Anglicans is very much geared toward discernment, because we believe and we practice the fact that when we gather together as a community in a prayerful, thoughtful way, the Holy Spirit comes and helps us discern what God is calling us to do. So the whole discernment process, and there are a lot of ways of doing it. You know, you start with Bible study. You start with sharing faith journeys. But how you structure your vestry meetings is going to be a very important way on how you let the Spirit in. Then obviously you go back to the congregation, you have town hall meetings, you have focus groups, you have, monkey surveys, survey monkeys, ways of discerning this whole thing. Discerning strengths. Spend time discerning the ministry strengths of your congregation. Often we do focus on, what aren't we doing right? We need more money, we need more people, we need more young families. All we need is that, all we need are those 25 young families who are going to pledge $25,000 a year and all our problems will be gone. And I know that there are challenges that need to be addressed, but focus on your strengths. Every community, every family, every individual, every organization has strengths. And it may be the fact that we're a small, family-sized, loving community. We don't have a big choir of paid section leaders from Juilliard and Columbia University, but we have meaningful, relevant, participatory worship. We are in a strategic part of our neighborhood, our city, our community. We are a beacon of hope in a broken world, longing for a relationship with Jesus and God. Discern your strengths, and then celebrate them. And then get back to, okay, we have some strengths, but we have some challenges. But if you look at the strengths first, the challenges become less overwhelming, which goes back to vision. Then you describe a hopeful picture of what the world will look like if you accomplish your mission. If our mission is to be connected to our neighborhood and bring Christ to a broken world, what would that look like? Would it mean that the parish, the church, the faith community will become a community center, a drop-in center? It'll be a place where people gather for public conversations and discussions. What might that look like? And then I identify a few major goals and then brainstorm strategies and then evaluate the strategies. And maybe instead of a 3 to 5 year strategic plan, even at this point, in the beginning of April, it's April, there are another 8 months left. Come up with 2 or 3 goals for the rest of the year. And it may be make an effort to connect, to find out what the neighborhood is thinking. And the strategy would be, have a multicultural potluck dinner inviting the neighborhood leaders. Again, I'm making this up. Come up with, 2 or 3 goals for the rest of the 2016. Brainstorm strategies, evaluate them using some kind of strategy screen. Make them smart as much as you can, and let's see where that takes you. But these are like 4 kind of, I think, simple ways or focused ways of taking your congregation or faith community from a place where you feel we're floundering a bit to an area where you're starting to engage in a process of visioning, planning, and letting the Spirit in. Because what you'll find is once you start that process, you're not going to want to turn back. Once you start having vestry meetings where you do focus on Bible study and visioning and strategic thinking, you're going to say, oh my God, how can we ever go back to that old agenda? Not that agendas aren't important, and not that budgets aren't important and buildings and grounds aren't important, but I really strongly believe that God is calling us to engage in an ongoing process of being open to the Spirit, and these are some practical ways of starting that. Yes, Archdeacon Lear, very good point. I've talked a lot. We have some time for questions, comments. This is your time, so please provide questions, comments, pushback. Does this make sense? Do you have any stories you can share with us, how you've tried to do this and whether it's been helpful? I see Mary Kearns, you have several people. It looks like it might be members of a vestry. Looks like, so anybody.
Yeah. And again, we have a number of people who are on and are muted. So there are several ways in which to ask a question or make a comment. The most direct or easiest way is to type something into the chat box, which is on the lower right-hand side of the screen. Another way is to use the Raise My Hand button, which is on the toolbar at the top of the screen. And then we will unmute those who have their hand raised.
Yeah, and Archdeacon Leary, you're saying some really good things. It is beyond business as usual. You know, there used to be this old, I think, outdated theory that, you know, vestries were just meant to deal with kind of the nuts and bolts business aspects of the parish. And that's important, but more and more vestries are, in partnership with the rector, have a much broader role because I think the only way the church is going to survive, yet alone thrive, and more important, actively engage in God's mission in the world is through this process of visioning and planning. So,
great.
Multiple attendees are typing, so we'll see. And, you know, back to Archdeacon Lear's, you know, the gifts. Assessing ministry strengths are also a way to assess gifts because, you know, ministry strengths are often, you know, what are the gifts of the members of the community? You know, this is kind of off topic, but part of this assessment process is also determining what are people's individual gifts and passions, especially as you're identifying new leadership, and especially as you're trying to come up with ideas for programs or ministry, and you say, okay, who might be the logical people to help move this forward? So, you know, that Paul's letter and metaphor about the body and gifts, that is more and more relevant now, I think, than it was in ancient Corinth, especially as life gets more complex. We are faced with bigger and bigger kind of challenges, and we really need to be more focused on what we're doing in order to be transformational and sustainable. Could you talk a bit about maintaining a mid-sized pastoral church versus growing? Yes. You know, I know we all want growth, and you know, we all want young families, we all want children. We worked with one parish that was in a very well-off kind of community in Southeast Florida that had a lot of gated condos with marinas, and mostly elderly, young retirees. And they really felt they needed young families to the point where they even hired a Sunday school teacher who was on call just in case that young family showed up. And finally, through this visioning and planning process, they finally decided, well, that's now who we are. We're actually called to serve and respond to the needs of our community, which happen to be younger, well-heeled retirees. And with that, they created a dynamic parish with a very significant outreach program because a lot of these young retirees wanted meaningful opportunities to volunteer and share their gifts. So, I mean, not every parish could be in an active, growing mold. I understand that. I mean, the issue is that unless there are new people entering the system and you have an aging congregation, there is going to be a diminution over time. But if you say you're committed to growth and that's either not possible, not feasible, not really a priority, you're also going to create unrealistic expectations and frustration among the larger community. Now, it doesn't mean you're not a welcoming community. It doesn't mean you don't encourage people to invite friends to church or invite friends to the church-related functions. But everyone has growth as a goal. And unless you're going to be very serious about that and put significant people resources, human resources, even financial resources, you might be kind of going down that proverbial rabbit hole. So, I mean, growth is important. We all talk about growth. We all want to grow. Organizations want to grow. But if that's going to be a goal, you really have to be really focused on what that looks like. Because if you're in a growth mode, basically everything you do is geared to the newcomer and not necessarily the person who's currently in the pews. So I don't know if that's helpful or not. I think empowering the current members of the congregation to be disciples can and will lead to growth if it's done right. Because part of being a disciple is being engaged in God's mission in the world. And remember that old Christian folk song, "They will know we are Christians by our love." So there are ways to engage in growth without necessarily saying we're going to double on our size in the next 3 to 5 years.
I see Barbara Ilka has 2 comments. They're sort of spread across other comments. Just kind of affirming the value of using vestry meetings to start kind of a strength discernment process, and then noting that there's difficulty getting the congregation involved. You know, they seem to expect the vestry will, do it all. I think it's a really significant question, and it connects to, if I may, I would say it connects to the value of doing a strength discernment process. Oftentimes, it's in those processes that you can identify, a vision that is shared by the congregation, or that is kind of energizes the congregation, and that's really, I think that's the first step toward getting members of the congregation more engaged and more involved in the future, the strategic future direction of the parish.
Another thing that we often recommend, I think one of the roles of the vestry is also to identify new leaders. Now, that's a role of the rector or the priest in charge. So it may be that, Miguel Escobar has been coming to church over the last several months. He seems to be enthusiastic. He seems bright. So you say, Miguel, can we sit down and have a cup of coffee? And you sit down with Miguel, as a vestry member or rector, and just have Miguel tell his story. You don't ask him, to join the vestry or to be chair of the stewardship committee or to run the new feeding ministry. You find out what Miguel is about, why he's coming to church, what he's passionate about. And then, you say, can we meet again in a month or in 2 weeks? You have a follow-up. And eventually, Miguel comes to the town meeting about, the mission statement or the visioning process. And all of a sudden, you've realized that Miguel's really passionate about, kids at risk. And one of the programs you're looking at is Kids at Risk. And you don't ask Miguel to chair the Kids at Risk committee. You say, Miguel, you seem to be passionate about this. Can you pull together 2 or 3 people in the parish who might share these concerns and come up with some ideas to the vestry that we might want to consider? So here you had, the vestry's been talking about, kids at risk in the neighborhood. And you're saying, yeah, but who's going to do it? We can't do everything. So what you've done through this process is you've reached out to a newcomer. You had him tell his story. You found out what he's passionate about. You identified a potential future leader, future vestry member, and you got someone to agree to bring together a group of people to engage in a mini discernment process that was consistent with what you felt the congregation was called to do. Now, that I think was kind of a very successful cup of coffee, even if you bought him an expensive latte. So, Heather, Yeah, and Heather, that's we've done that. We've done that. And that's a challenge. And I think one way of doing that is, I think sometimes when older members of congregation said, we've done that and it doesn't work, what they're really saying is, I want to tell my story. I want to tell my story about being at this congregation all these years, and quite frankly, no one's listened to me for the next 10 years. All they want is my money. So if, Helen, who's been there for 50 years, talks about how wonderful it was 50 years ago when we had, 1,000 people at Christmas Eve and 600 kids in the Sunday school, even though the church only holds 75, she gets to tell her story. And then you get to say, Helen, we're so glad that you're still a member of this congregation. Obviously, this place means a lot to you. But we know, society has changed, the community has changed. How can this place continue to be a relevant place for the newcomers, much the way it was for you? And we really need your love and support and stories to help us plan kind of new ways of being this faith community. Yeah, creating a sense of urgency. Oh, how do you create a sense of urgency without kind of being while being a non-anxious presence? In fact, my next book I think is going to be called The Speed of Church, because we really feel as though we have millennia to make these things happen. And I think what I often will say is we have to look at this process. It's the sense of urgency is kind of the urgency of Advent. Now, the expectancy of Advent, it's not a panic, but it's like something's happening. We really need to do something because, we only have 4 weeks and this Christmas thing is coming and this is exciting and it's wonderful. So I think often creating a sense of excitement is the precursor to creating a sense of urgency. Because if you don't want panic. You want urgency, not panic. And sometimes the line is thin. But, back to Miguel's point, if you talk about, the wonderful things that are happening, it's like, darn, we have an incredible community. We're doing some great things. We want to share this with our friends and neighbors, and we want to do it now. The time is now. So, but I do think urgency has to be part of the process.
Great. Well, I think that right at about 8 o'clock, so I want to move on to the last few minutes, and if you have a few more comments, please, by all means. Just a few notes. Again, thank you for attending a webinar, and there are additional webinars. ECF does Spanish language webinars, so if you are part of a congregation that has Spanish language members, or are familiar with Spanish clergy and congregations in your diocese, please let them know. We're going to be doing a webinar on leading change in Spanish as well. For those who have endowments, on April 20th, we will be doing a webinar on spending rules and investment allocations. Let's talk very specifically about resources. And then in May, we're going to be talking about congregational conflict and first steps in understanding what's going on when we encounter congregational conflict. Final little note, which is in your email, you should be receiving pretty shortly a survey asking you to just let us know how you thought this webinar went. Are there places that could have been that were really strong or could be strengthened? We really appreciate your feedback in all of this. And Donald, I'll let you have the final word.
Yeah, I mean, we do have a formal program to help congregations in this process. We have resources on our Vital Practices website, but give us a call. If we can be helpful in helping you kind of figure this out, please give us a call. We'd be glad to have a conversation with you or a conversation with you, your key leaders, just to help you get off the dime. So But we're here for you. Thank you for taking the time. These are always great opportunities to meet some wonderful people, to make some new contacts, and to kind of brainstorm some of the things we're passionate about. So God bless you all in your ministries, and thank you for being with us tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Donald.